When the sun started to rise over the Nevada desert, the heat was already creeping across the runway at Nellis Air Force Base. The morning looked quiet, but everyone there knew that the calm never lasted long. It was a base where the world's best fighter pilots trained, and nothing about it was ordinary. That morning, a new pilot arrived from the 20th Fighter Squadron. Nobody paid much attention at first. New arrivals came and went all the time. But this one carried himself differently. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his eyes steady, and his steps confident but not proud. He didn't talk much, and when he did, his voice was calm and even. His call sign, 20D, was the only name people used. The crew already had their opinions before he even touched a jet. To them, he was just another young pilot who had studied more than he had flown. Most rookies looked impressive on paper but froze when things got real in the air. The F-22 community was full of quiet legends. Men and women who had logged thousands of hours and survived impossible missions. To earn their respect, you didn't just need skills. You needed heart, instinct, and the ability to stay steady when everything went wrong. D seemed too quiet for that kind of life. During his first briefing, the squadron's lead instructor explained the week's schedule and upcoming flight plans. The other pilots cracked jokes and threw light remarks back and forth. 20D just listened, taking notes in a small black notebook. When the instructor asked if anyone had questions, he raised his hand. "Sir, are the flight paths adjusted for the new wind direction this week?" he asked. The room went quiet for a moment. The question wasn't disrespectful, it was precise, practical. The instructor gave a slow nod. "Good catch," he said. Then he went on with the meeting. When it ended, a few of the older pilots exchanged looks. The new guy had caught something even the lead had skipped over. Some found it impressive. Others saw it as showing off. But 20D didn't seem to notice the looks. He simply closed his notebook, tucked it under his arm, and left the room as calmly as he had entered. That night, while most pilots were at the gym or grabbing dinner, 20D stayed in the mission room. The lights were dim, the hum of the computers echoing softly as he replayed recorded flight data. He watched every maneuver, paused each radar reading, and took more notes. He wasn't just studying the jets, he was studying the people who flew them. Every pilot had a pattern, a rhythm in the way they made decisions. He wanted to understand that rhythm before joining them in the sky. When one of the maintenance techs came by to shut down the system, he found 20D still there. "You know, you don't have to kill yourself with this stuff," the tech said. "Most guys your rank are already at the bar by now." 20D smiled faintly. "I'll head there once I understand the radar signatures," he replied. The tech laughed, shaking his head. "You're a different one." By the next morning, word had spread that the new pilot from 20D spent all night studying flight data. To the crew, that could mean two things. He was either completely dedicated or trying too hard. Either way, everyone was curious. The following day, 20D attended his first squadron briefing with the full crew. They were preparing for a complex exercise involving simulated enemy aircraft. The lead pilot, known for his no-nonsense attitude, outlined the mission plan. His eyes flicked toward 20D now and then, gauging his reaction. When the briefing ended, he called him aside. "Tomorrow's flight, you're flying as my wingman," he said. "Stay close, don't improvise, and don't talk unless I tell you to." "Yes, sir," 20D replied simply. The older pilot gave a small nod. "Good, let's see what you've got." That night, 20D prepared quietly in his quarters. He didn't scroll through his phone or call anyone. He went through the mission data again, memorizing every waypoint and every coded radio phrase. For him, the flight wasn't about showing off, it was about earning trust. He knew that in this world you could only prove yourself once. The next morning, the desert air shimmered with heat as the F-22s rolled out onto the runway. The sound of the engines was deafening, a deep thunder that vibrated in the chest. 20D climbed into his jet, adjusting his oxygen mask and checking the switches in calm sequence. Around him, the crew prepared with muscle memory precision. From the control tower, the order came through. "Raptors, you're clear for takeoff." The jets roared down the strip, lifting smoothly into the blue sky. Up there, everything changed. The ground fell away, and the only sounds were the hum of the engines and the crisp voices over the radio. 20D's hands moved with care, his eyes scanning the horizon and radar display. The training scenario involved mock combat with simulated enemy aircraft, fast, unpredictable, and aggressive. At first, he followed his leader's every instruction exactly, But halfway through the exercise, the radar showed something strange, a sudden blip that didn't fit the expected pattern. It flickered in and out, moving faster than the rest. The other pilots continued their plan, but 20D kept an eye on it. His instincts told him something was off. "Led, this is 20D, he said over the radio, voice steady. "I've got an irregular contact bearing 095 moving fast." The leader paused for half a second. "Probably a ghost signal," he replied. "Ignore and stay in formation." But the blip appeared again, this time closing in at a sharp angle. 20D's training kicked in. He adjusted his course slightly, just enough to check the signal without breaking formation. Within seconds, the system confirmed it. A simulated stealth target designed to test their alertness. He reacted instantly, pulling a tight maneuver that caught the enemy off guard. The mock dogfight lasted only seconds, but when it ended, the control tower announced that 20D had successfully intercepted the stealth contact before anyone else had even noticed it. The radio went quiet. Even the instructor monitoring from the ground took a moment before speaking. "Good catch, 20D, the voice finally said. "Mission complete. Return to base." When they landed, 20D removed his helmet, sweat running down his forehead. The other pilots climbed out too, glancing his way but saying little. The squadron leader approached slowly. "Not bad for your first day," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes showed something close to surprise. "Thank you, sir," 20D replied. Inside the debriefing room, the atmosphere was different. Usually after a flight, pilots joked and replayed their favorite moments. This time, everyone seemed to replay one specific move. The instant 20D had seen something no one else did. The instructor replayed the radar footage for the whole team. "Here," he said, pointing at the moment. "That's what experience looks like. Or maybe instinct." Then he glanced at 20D. "You've got sharp eyes." 20D nodded slightly, not smiling, not boasting. "Just lucky timing," he said quietly. After the debriefing, two of the other pilots stopped him in the hallway. "You saw that ghost signal before we even processed it," one said. "How?" "I just followed the radar fluctuations," 20D replied. "Sometimes a half-second delay can hide a return. I wanted to make sure." They exchanged looks again. This time not with doubt, but with respect they didn't want to show too openly. That night, 20D was again the last person in the mission room. The same maintenance tech saw him there and grinned. "Don't tell me you're studying again." "Just reviewing," 20D said. "You already beat the simulation," the tech said. "You trying to set a record?" 20D looked at the glowing radar image on the screen. "Not a record," he said softly. "Just trying to understand what I missed." The tech shook his head with a small laugh. "You're going to make the rest of them nervous if you keep this up." Over the next few days, the base carried on as usual, but 20D's name came up more often in quiet conversations. Pilots who had doubted him began to pay attention to how he spoke during briefings. Precise, respectful, never wasting words. Some started asking for his input on flight patterns. He never acted like he was better than anyone else. He simply offered help where it was needed. One evening, while they were preparing for another training mission, the squadron leader approached him again. "You've got good instincts," he said. "But instincts alone don't make a good pilot. You keep your head clear, you'll do fine here." 20D nodded. "Understood, sir." The leader gave a small smile. "And maybe next time you can teach the rest of us how to spot ghosts that fast." 20D just smiled back, quietly adjusting his helmet strap. That night he stood outside near the runway, looking out at the jets parked under the floodlights. The desert wind was cool, carrying the faint smell of fuel and dust. The sky above was endless, dotted with stars. He knew he still had a long way to go before he'd truly belong among these pilots. Respect in the Air Force wasn't given. It had to be earned flight after flight, one quiet moment at a time. But for now, he'd taken the first step. And as the lights of the runway flickered in the distance, he thought to himself that maybe one day, when the crew spoke about the pilots they trusted most, someone might mention the quiet one from 20D. The next week at Nellis Air Force Base started with the usual early morning buzz. The air smelled like jet fuel and dust. Crews moved between hangars, checking equipment, and pilots prepared for another round of tactical training. But this week's mission wasn't just another routine flight. It was going to be one of the toughest exercises of the season, and 20D was now part of it. The squadron leader had decided it was time to see if the new pilot could really handle pressure. The test would push every member of the team to their limits. It wasn't just about flying. It was about thinking faster than anyone else in the sky. In the main briefing room, the pilots sat in a half circle, listening as the leader explained the mission. The plan was a large-scale mock battle between two F-22 teams. One would play the aggressors and the other would defend key positions. It was meant to feel as close to real combat as possible. Radar jamming, low visibility, and sudden changes in the scenario. D listened carefully, his focus steady. He didn't fidget or whisper like some of the others. The crew had started to notice that about him. He didn't react much, no matter how intense things got. Some found it unnerving. Others admired it. When the briefing ended, the squadron leader glanced at him. 20D, you're leading one of the defensive units today. You'll have 2 Raptors under your command. Let's see how you handle responsibility. Yes, sir, he replied calmly. That sentence made a few eyebrows rise. It wasn't common for a newcomer to be given command responsibility this early. The veterans didn't say anything out loud, but their looks said enough. He better not mess this up. Before the flight, the crew gathered in the hangar. The F-22s gleamed under the lights, their surfaces clean and mirror-like. Ground staff checked each panel, each fuel line. 20D stood beside his jet, reading over his mission notes. The mechanic nearby glanced up. You ready for this? He asked. Always, 20D said quietly with a small nod. Soon the jets were lined up on the runway. The sun was just climbing, turning the desert sky orange and gold. Over the radio, the control tower cleared them for takeoff. One by one, the Raptors thundered down the strip, lifting into the air with flawless grace. Inside the cockpit, 20D felt the familiar calm settle in. The controls under his hands responded smoothly, the sound of the engine steady and deep. He checked his instruments and adjusted his oxygen flow. The radio came alive with quick, sharp voices, instructions, confirmations, coded chatter. The training began almost immediately. The aggressor team appeared on radar as a spread of fast-moving dots closing in from the west. 20D led his section low, hugging the terrain to avoid early detection. His voice stayed calm over the radio as he gave directions. Maintain formation. Reduce altitude by 20 feet. Keep visual contact but no engagement yet. His 2 wingmen responded without hesitation. They could hear the control in his tone. Minutes later, radar screens started to light up. The aggressors had launched simulated attacks. Flares and electronic pulses filled the radar, mimicking missile locks. The air was thick with fake targets, confusing everyone's systems. One of 20D's wingmen cursed softly over the radio. I'm losing tracking, too much interference. Stay steady, 20D said. Switch to passive scan. Watch your visual range. He adjusted his own radar filters, tuning out the noise until only a few faint signals remained. Then he saw it. One real threat hidden among the false ones. He didn't wait for orders. Contact bearing 060, altitude high. Move to intercept, now! The 3 jets turned sharply in sync, their wings cutting through thin air. Within seconds, they had positioned themselves perfectly. The aggressor jet tried to loop behind them but failed. The mock missile alert sounded in 20D's favor. Target neutralized. Down at mission control, instructors watched the live feed. One of them leaned toward another and said, He caught that pattern faster than the simulator predicted. The other nodded. He's not flying like a rookie. Up in the sky, the battle continued. The radio was filled with quick commands and status reports. The aggressor team fought back hard, forcing 20D's group into tight maneuvers. At one point, a false signal made it seem like a missile lock was heading straight for his jet. Instead of panicking, he turned off active radar for 10 seconds and banked low. The signal vanished. Another trick exposed. By the time the exercise ended, the defensive team had scored higher than anyone expected. 20D's calm leadership had guided his unit through one of the most complicated mock missions of the month. When the jets landed and taxied back to the hangar, the pilots climbed out one by one, removing helmets and catching their breath. The squadron leader was already waiting by the flight line, arms crossed. He watched 20D walk toward him, still calm, still quiet. That was good flying, the leader said. You saw through the jamming pattern before anyone else. How did you know? The signal lag was inconsistent, 20D explained. Real targets move differently than generated ones. I just focused on the delay. The leader gave a short nod, clearly impressed but unwilling to show it fully. Keep flying like that and people will start listening to you. Inside the debrief room, the crew sat around the big screen as the instructor replayed highlights. Each pilot's movements appeared as colored lines tracing across the digital map. 20D's line was clean, sharp, always moving with purpose. This, the instructor said, pointing to the screen, is what precision looks like. No wasted motion, no panic. That's why his unit came out on top. Some of the older pilots clapped lightly. A few smiled, though some stayed quiet, still not ready to admit they were impressed. But no one doubted now that the newcomer had skill. After the session, 20D stayed behind to review the footage again. The instructor noticed and walked over. "You're not satisfied, are you?" "There's always something to fix," 20D said. "I turned too wide in the second loop. Could have been cleaner." The instructor chuckled. "You're chasing perfection, huh?" 20D shrugged slightly, just trying to be ready for the real thing. Later that evening, the pilots gathered at the small on-base cafe. It was their way to unwind after tough missions. For the first time, 20D joined them. The conversation started light, jokes about radio static, small mistakes, and the usual pilot banter. Then one of the veterans turned to him. "So 20D," he said, "you ever get nervous up there? You sound like you've got ice in your veins." 20D smiled faintly. "Everyone gets nervous," he said. "You just learn not to let it talk louder than your training." That answer made a few of them laugh, but it also stuck with them. By the end of the night, the crew's tone toward him had changed. They didn't see him as the quiet outsider anymore. He wasn't just the rookie who stayed late studying flight data. He had proved he could handle chaos and make the right call under pressure. The next morning, before sunrise, 20D was already in the hangar. He liked the silence before the base came alive, the echo of his footsteps, the soft whir of machines, the rows of jets gleaming in the dim light. He ran his hand along the smooth surface of his aircraft, almost like greeting an old friend. The mechanic from earlier spotted him. "You're back early again," he said, half laughing. "I wanted to go over yesterday's readings," 20D replied. "You ever sleep?" "Sometimes," 20D said with a small grin. The mechanic shook his head. "You're something else, kid. Most pilots act like hotshots. You just act like you've got nothing to prove." 20D paused for a second. "Maybe that's the point," he said softly. Over the next few days, the squadron continued its routine. But things were different now. During planning meetings, people started asking for 20D's opinion. When problems came up, he offered simple, clear solutions that worked. He didn't talk more than necessary, yet his presence carried weight. One afternoon, while they prepared for another mission, the squadron leader walked up beside him. "You did well last time," he said. "But next flight, we're changing things. You'll fly on my wing. You've earned that spot." 20D looked up, surprised. "Understood, sir." The leader smiled faintly. "Let's see how you handle being my shadow." As the leader walked away, 20D looked at the jet waiting for him. He could already feel the excitement rising. It wasn't about pride. It was about trust, the kind that took more than skill to earn. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he stood by the runway again, watching the last of the jets return from a late sortie. The air was still warm, glowing orange from the fading light. He thought about everything that had happened in just a few days. The suspicion, the pressure, the quiet victories. Slowly, the respect he had wanted wasn't something he had to chase anymore. It was starting to find him on its own, and somewhere deep inside he knew this was only the beginning. The days at Nellis Air Force Base moved fast after that big training exercise. Every morning started before the sun rose, and every night ended long after it went down. Pilots came and went between briefings, maintenance checks, and simulator sessions. The desert heat never really left, even at night. The hangars were always alive with noise, engines being tested, mechanics shouting over the sound of drills, and jets roaring down the strip. For 20D, the schedule didn't change much. He still showed up early, still stayed late, and still spent hours reviewing radar data after everyone else went home. But what had changed was how people looked at him. Before, when he walked into a room, he was just the quiet new pilot, the one nobody really noticed. Now when he entered, a few heads turned. The other pilots didn't say much, but they nodded to him, sometimes even made room at the table. It wasn't open praise, not yet, but it was the kind of quiet acknowledgement that meant something. In a world where respect wasn't handed out easily, the squadron leader had kept a close eye on him since that training mission. He didn't say much about it, but everyone could tell that 20D had caught his attention. That week, he started pairing 20D with more experienced pilots on short training flights, small exercises designed to test teamwork. The first of those flights didn't go perfectly. The mission was simple, a defensive formation against mock intruders. 20D's wingman, an older pilot with years of experience, preferred doing things his own way. He didn't like taking instructions from someone younger, even if it was just training. When 20D gave directions over the radio, his partner responded with a half-second delay, sometimes ignoring small commands altogether. It was a quiet kind of defiance, not enough to break protocol, but enough to make things harder. When they landed, the squadron leader pulled both of them aside. "You two need to sync up," he said firmly. "If one of you turns a second late out there, that's all it takes to lose a mission." "Yes, sir," 20D said immediately. The other pilot nodded without looking at him. That night, instead of heading straight to the mess hall like everyone else, 20D stopped by the flight simulation room. The lights were low, the screens glowing blue in the dark. He sat down at one of the simulators and began replaying the mission, adjusting for every delay and miscommunication. After a few minutes, the same older pilot walked in. He looked surprised to see 20D there. "You still working?" he asked. "Just going over the flight pattern," 20D said, eyes still on the screen. The older pilot stood there for a moment. Then he sighed. "You know, I didn't ignore your calls on purpose," he said. "I just don't like following someone I don't know." 20D finally looked up. "That's fair," he said quietly. "You don't have to follow me. You just have to trust me enough not to question the mission when it counts." The other man smiled a little. "You talk like someone who's been doing this for 20 years. "I've just learned that trust keeps people alive," 20D replied. They spent the next 2 hours going over every part of the flight together. When they finished, the older pilot stood and said, "You're all right, kid. Let's make sure we fly like a real team next time." The next day, their training went smoother. The communication between them was tight and quick. By the end of the exercise, even the squadron leader gave a nod of approval. Little by little, the walls around 20D started coming down. In the cafeteria, he'd sit with a few others now, not talking much, but enough to join in when the crew joked about something that happened mid-flight. He laughed sometimes too, quietly in his own way. The others began to realize that beneath his calm, almost cold focus, there was a good heart. He never showed off, never talked about himself, and never corrected anyone even when he was right. One afternoon, the base was hit with a sudden maintenance delay. A small technical fault had grounded several jets, and the crew had to work overtime to fix it. The ground mechanics were short-handed, and most pilots had gone to rest in the lounge. But 20D didn't leave. He took off his gloves, walked straight to the hangar, and started helping the crew check wiring and fuel lines. The mechanics looked at him surprised. "Sir, you don't have to do this," one of them said. "I know," 20D replied, "but I want to learn how the systems behave when they're stressed." They let him help. It wasn't easy work. His hands got greasy, and the heat from the engine was almost unbearable. But he stayed until the last jet was cleared for takeoff again. Later, when the squadron leader found out, he didn't say anything for a moment. Then he just nodded to himself and said quietly, "That's the kind of pilot I want in my squadron." By the end of that week, the mood around 20D had completely changed. The same people who once ignored him now included him in strategy talks. Some came to him with questions about radar data or flight paths. He always answered simply, and never took credit. One evening, a few pilots were sitting outside near the runway, watching the sun go down behind the mountains. The air was warm, and the smell of jet fuel lingered faintly. Someone handed 20D a cup of coffee and said, "So what's your story, man? You act like this is your whole life." 20D looked at the fading light for a long moment before answering. "It's not my whole life," he said, "but it's the part that teaches me who I am." No one said anything for a while after that. The sound of jets in the distance filled the silence. Then one of them chuckled softly. "You talk like a movie character, you know that?" 20D smiled. "Maybe," he said. "But it's true." After that night, things felt lighter between them. He was no longer the outsider. When he walked into the briefing room now, the pilots greeted him openly. During missions, his voice on the radio carried weight, not because of his rank, but because everyone trusted him to see what others might miss. One morning, The squadron leader called him into his office. The tone was serious, but his eyes were warm. "You've earned your place here," he said. "People trust you. That's not easy to get around here." 20D nodded. "Thank you, sir." The leader leaned back in his chair. "You've got something rare, quiet confidence. You don't push, but people still follow. Keep that balance. Don't lose it." That afternoon, 20D led a small formation over the desert for a navigation test. The sun was bright and the sky stretched endlessly ahead of them. The flight was routine, but even in simple exercises, 20D treated every second like it mattered. Every turn, every altitude change, everything had to be perfect. After landing, he stayed by his jet for a moment, just looking at it. To him, it wasn't just a machine. It was a reminder of why he was here. Not to prove he was the best, but to prove that discipline, calmness, and respect could earn their own kind of strength. The crew's respect didn't come all at once. It came in small gestures and a nod after a briefing, a pilot asking his opinion, a quiet "good job" after a mission. But those gestures meant more to him than any medal ever could. That night, as the stars spread across the sky, he walked back from the hangar alone. The desert air was cool, and the sound of wind against the metal buildings echoed softly. He thought about how things had changed, how not long ago people doubted him, and now they trusted him to lead. But he also knew it wasn't over. Earning respect was one thing. Keeping it, that took even more. Inside his quarters, he sat at his desk and opened his notebook, the same one he'd brought from the day he arrived. On the last page, he wrote a simple line: "Trust is built one flight at a time." He closed the book, leaned back in his chair, and smiled faintly. For the first time since arriving, he felt at home. The morning was unusually quiet at Nellis Air Force Base. The desert sun had barely touched the horizon, and the sky was a soft shade of orange, stretching endlessly over the runway. Normally, the base hummed with activity at this hour, pilots moving between hangars, maintenance crews running checks, and the distant roar of engines warming up. But today there was a tense calm, the kind that comes before something important. The alert came just after sunrise. A reconnaissance aircraft had been spotted in international airspace, and reports indicated that unidentified fighter jets were nearby. It wasn't a drill. This was real, and the F-22 squadron scrambled immediately. The pilots climbed into their jets, checking instruments and adjusting helmets. The roar of engines filled the hangar as the machines came to life, the sound vibrating through every corner of the base. Quint D was assigned as wingman to the squadron leader for this mission. He had flown in exercises before, but this was different. Real stakes, real danger, and real consequences. He ran through his pre-flight checklist calmly, almost methodically. The other pilots around him moved quickly, but with tension in their shoulders. The leader gave him a nod. "Let's keep this clean. Eyes open, stick together," he said. "Yes, sir," 20D replied, voice steady. The jets taxied onto the runway and lifted into the clear desert sky, the wind whipping against their fuselages. Above them, the first rays of the sun reflected off the wings, casting a golden glow. The squadron moved as one, their formation tight and precise. Every pilot knew their role, and every movement was a result of countless hours of training. Within minutes, the radar screens lit up. Multiple fast-moving aircraft appeared, some maneuvering aggressively around the reconnaissance plane. The situation demanded split-second decisions. The squadron leader issued orders, and 20D followed, his focus unbroken. But then he noticed something unusual on his radar. A faint signal, almost hidden behind the main formation, flickered in and out. It didn't match any standard flight pattern. He had seen similar anomalies during training, but this was the first time it was real. "Lead, this is 20D, he said over the radio, calm but precise. "I'm tracking a secondary contact. Bearing 095, moving fast, low visibility. It may be concealed behind the cloud cover." There was a brief pause. The squadron leader replied, cautious but attentive. "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir. It doesn't fit the pattern of the others. I recommend a course adjustment to intercept," 20D said. The leader hesitated. It was risky. Adjusting course could break formation and expose them to potential danger. But he trusted 20D's judgment. "Copy that. Adjust course. Keep formation tight." 20D executed the maneuver with precision. His jet banked sharply, cutting through the clouds, following the hidden blip on the radar. Seconds later, the secondary contact revealed itself, an unmarked aircraft moving quickly, previously masked by the cloud formations. The squadron reacted immediately, repositioning to maintain control of the situation. The unidentified plane made aggressive maneuvers, trying to evade detection and establish a threatening position. But 20D's quick analysis and timely course adjustment had given the squadron the advantage. Contact visual, one of the pilots reported. Target identified. Maintain defensive posture, the leader instructed. Do not engage unless necessary. D monitored the radar while keeping a visual lock. His training and instincts kicked in. Every move the unidentified aircraft made was anticipated. Every adjustment accounted for. The squadron moved like a single organism, following the rhythm of the leader but guided in part by 20D's awareness. Minutes stretched like hours as the encounter continued. Every pilot was aware that a single mistake could escalate into a real conflict. Yet despite the tension, 20D's calm voice over the radio steadied the team. Lead, maintain altitude 20 feet higher. Shift vector slightly east. That should keep us in control while tracking the target. The maneuver worked perfectly. The unmarked aircraft, unable to gain a tactical advantage, altered its course and moved out of the area. The reconnaissance plane was now clear to continue its path. Good work, 20D, the leader said, voice calm but carrying a hint of relief. Your call saved us time and maintained control. Thank you, sir, 20D replied simply, not letting the praise affect his focus. As the jets began to return to base, the tension slowly lifted. Pilots exchanged glances over the radio, a mix of relief and admiration in their voices. 20D remained focused, running through post-mission checks, ensuring that the squadron maintained formation until safely back on the ground. When they landed, the hangar was alive with activity. Mechanics rushed to check the jets, communications officers relayed updates, and pilots climbed out, removing helmets and adjusting suits. The squadron leader removed his gloves and turned to 20D. You did well, he said quietly. That contact you identified, it could have caused a real problem if it wasn't spotted. You handled it perfectly. 20D nodded, his face calm, showing neither pride nor relief. Just doing my job, sir. The debriefing room was filled with tension even after the successful mission. Everyone replayed the encounter, analyzing radar logs, flight patterns, and communication logs. The instructors highlighted the importance of detecting anomalies quickly. When the radar feed showed 20D's intervention, several heads turned. His quick thinking had prevented the unmarked aircraft from gaining an advantage and ensured the safety of the reconnaissance plane. After the debrief, some of the veteran pilots approached him. You caught that blip faster than anyone else, one said. We wouldn't have seen it without you. 20D shrugged lightly. It was there. You just have to know what to look for. Even the squadron leader, who usually spoke little outside formal debriefings, nodded approvingly. Your instincts are sharp. You're not just following orders, and you're thinking ahead. That's rare. Later, as the sun began to set, 20D walked near the runway, watching the jets lined up in the fading light. The wind carried the faint scent of fuel and dust. He felt the weight of the day, the seriousness of what had happened, but also the quiet satisfaction of having contributed something meaningful. He wasn't looking for praise. Respect in the Air Force wasn't given lightly, and he knew it had to be earned through consistent action. Today had been a test, and for the first time, he felt the difference between being trusted and just being tolerated. That evening, the pilots gathered for their routine post-mission meeting. Usually these were filled with light conversation and casual jokes. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was quieter, more reflective. They spoke about what went right, what could be improved, and how each pilot had contributed. One of the veterans finally spoke up. I have to admit I didn't expect him to notice that secondary contact. He saw it before any of us even realized it was there. Another pilot nodded. Yeah, calm under pressure, no hesitation. That's the difference. 20D stayed quiet, listening. He didn't feel the need to explain or justify anything. His actions had spoken for themselves. Later, while the rest of the crew relaxed, 20D returned to the simulation room. He reviewed the mission from every angle, checking radar logs, flight paths, and timing. Even though the mission was successful, he analyzed each moment critically. Every second mattered, and he wanted to be ready for whatever came next. A mechanic who had stayed late to help with post-flight maintenance noticed him. "You never stop, do you?" he asked with a grin. "I have to understand it completely," 20D replied. "Every detail could make a difference next time." The mechanic shook his head, half amused and half impressed. "Most guys would be done for the night. You've got a mind like a steel trap." 20D smiled faintly. Better to be ready than caught off guard. That night, as he finally walked back to his quarters, the desert was dark, the stars sharp and clear above. He thought about the day. The tension, the split-second decisions, the quiet teamwork that had saved the reconnaissance plane. He realized that respect in this environment wasn't about bravado or speed. It was about discipline, focus, and the courage to act when it mattered most. He knew the next mission could be different. It could be more dangerous, more complicated. But for the first time, he felt a deep sense of belonging. He had proven not just to others but to himself that he could handle the pressure of real missions. And as the lights of the base flickered behind him, he silently prepared for whatever challenge would come next, ready to earn the trust of the squadron again, one flight at a time,